He grabbed her wrist so hard she dropped her phone on the sidewalk. Right there. Rush hour. 43 people walked past, and not one of them stopped. Marcus Hale leaned close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath, and he smiled, that soft, patient smile that had nothing behind it but ownership. And he said, "You think you can just disappear on me? Baby, I'm the only good thing that ever happened to you." Nia Brooks didn't scream. She had learned a long time ago that screaming only made things worse. What would you do if the person who destroyed your confidence refused to believe the story was over? What would you do if you walked out your front door every single morning already knowing he was there? This is the story of a woman who was slowly being erased, and the man no one expected to notice her. If this kind of story moves you, hit subscribe right now. We release new stories every week, the kind that stay with you long after you close the app. Drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The rain started at 8:30, not the dramatic kind, not thunder, not lightning, just the thin, miserable kind that New York does in October when it can't even commit to a proper storm. The kind that soaks through your coat collar and doesn't apologize for it. Nia Brooks stood at the window of the 34th floor and watched the city below turn slick and gray. She held a manila folder she didn't need against her chest, mostly so her arms had something to do. The office had been empty for 40 minutes. The cleaning crew wouldn't arrive until 10. Between now and then, she had the whole floor to herself. The silent conference rooms, the dark hallways, the little kitchen that still smelled faintly of someone's burned popcorn from that afternoon. She liked this hour. She hated that she liked this hour. There was something wrong with a 30-year-old woman who preferred to spend her evenings alone in a corporate building rather than go home. She knew that. She wasn't oblivious to it. But knowing a thing and being able to change it are two entirely different problems, and Nia had been stuck in the space between them for almost 2 years. Her phone lit up on the desk. She looked at the screen. Unknown number, which wasn't really unknown to her anymore. She had memorized the last 4 digits the way you memorize a bruise. You don't go looking for it, but you always know exactly where it is. She let it ring. It rang 8 times, then it stopped. She exhaled. 3 seconds later, it rang again. This was the thing people never understood about what was happening to her. There was no single moment you could point to and say, "Here, this is the crime. This is where you call the police." It was just a phone ringing. It was just a man who kept showing up. It was just texts that said, "I miss you," and "Can we talk?" and "You're being dramatic." None of it looked like anything from the outside. From the outside, it looked like a woman who couldn't get over a breakup. She set the folder down, pressed her palm flat against the cold glass of the window, and breathed. The phone stopped ringing. She didn't let herself cry. She was very good at not letting herself cry. She had practiced it the way other people practice instruments, with discipline, with intention, with the specific knowledge of what failure would cost her. What she didn't know was that the door behind her had opened 2 minutes ago. Lorenzo Devereaux had come back for his phone charger. That was all. He'd left it plugged in beside the credenza in his private office, remembered it on his way down to the car, and come back up for it because he had a 6:30 call in the morning and hotel chargers never worked the way they should. 45 seconds, in and out, no reason to turn on any lights. But when he stepped off the elevator, he saw her silhouette against the window. He stopped. He was not a man who startled easily. There were people in this city with extremely strong financial reasons to want him dead, and he had stayed alive this long by staying calm in uncertain moments. So he didn't announce himself. He simply stood in the dark hallway and watched her, hand still pressed to the glass, the whole city below her like something that didn't belong to her and never would. He watched her shoulder drop. He watched her press the back of her hand against her mouth. And he understood with absolute certainty that she was trying very, very hard not to fall apart. He had seen a lot of people cry in his life. He had seen men cry when they lost everything and cry again when they thought it might come back. He had seen his mother cry at a kitchen table in a way that didn't make any sound, which was the worst kind. He knew what genuine grief looked like when it was trying to hide itself. This was that. He backed up 2 steps, turned around, and went back to his office. He stood there for a moment in the dark, charger in hand, not entirely sure what he was feeling. It wasn't pity, exactly. Pity was easy. Pity let you feel slightly superior while feeling slightly bad. This was something else. This was the specific discomfort of having seen something you weren't meant to see and not being able to unknow it. He plugged the charger into his bag. He went back down the hall, pressed the elevator button, and waited. When the doors opened, he stepped in. He rode all the way down without looking back. Nia had worked for Lorenzo Devereaux for 14 months. She had not wanted the job initially. She'd been placed by a temp agency supposed to fill in for 3 weeks while his regular secretary was on maternity leave, and then the 3 weeks became 6, and 6 became 12. And at some point, Lorenzo's assistant director of operations had quietly asked if she'd considered making it permanent. She'd said yes because the salary was extraordinary. She'd said yes because the building had round-the-clock security in the lobby. She'd said yes because on the third morning of the placement, she had realized that Marcus didn't know where she worked, and that for 8 hours every day she could stop looking over her shoulder. She had not said yes because she particularly wanted to work for a man whose Wikipedia page contained the phrase, "alleged ties to organized criminal networks" in the third paragraph. But Lorenzo Devereaux, in 14 months, had never once made her feel unsafe. He was demanding in the way that men with very specific standards are demanding. He wanted things done a particular way. He expected accuracy. He did not enjoy surprises. But he was not cruel. He did not raise his voice. He had never once commented on her weight or her appearance or made her feel like she occupied too much space, which, after 2 years of Marcus Hale, was such a profound relief that it sometimes genuinely caught her off guard. He also, as far as she could tell, never looked at her as anything other than someone who was very good at her job, which suited her fine. She was good at her job. She got in every morning at 7:45. She kept his calendar with the kind of precision that impressed people who had been organizing high-level schedules for decades. She intercepted problems before they became his problems. She remembered everyone's birthdays. She tracked the subtle social dynamics of every room before he entered it and made sure he was never caught off guard. She was, by any reasonable measure, exceptional at what she did. She was also, by any reasonable measure, barely sleeping. The morning after he saw her at the window, Lorenzo arrived at 8:12. This was late for him. His usual arrival was 8 on the dot, sometimes 7:50. He was a creature of discipline in most things, and punctuality was among the disciplines he took most seriously. 8:12 meant something had delayed him, or that he had made a choice. Nia was already at her desk with his first coffee ready. "Good morning, Mr. Devereaux." "Morning." He took the coffee. His eyes moved over her face for half a second, the kind of look that didn't stop long enough to be a look, just a quick register. She had dark circles under her eyes that her concealer hadn't quite reached. "Anything urgent?" Mr. Petrelli moved his 9 o'clock to 10:30. "The contracts from the Harmon deal came in overnight. I flagged the sections you'll want to review before signing, and your 4 o'clock has confirmed." "Good." He took a step toward his office, then stopped. "Did you eat this morning?" She blinked. "Sorry?" "Breakfast." He said it like it was a perfectly normal question, which, from him, it was not. He had never asked her anything like that before. "There's a box from that place on 53rd in the kitchen. Someone brought it for the team meeting yesterday, and apparently nobody touched it. Don't let it go to waste." He went into his office and closed the door. Nia sat very still at her desk for a moment. Then she pulled the Harmon contracts toward her and went back to work. She did not go get pastry from the kitchen. She wasn't hungry. She hadn't been hungry in weeks, really, eating on a schedule she'd set for herself because she knew she was supposed to, the way you keep watering a plant you're not sure is still alive. At 11:17, Lorenzo came out of his office. "Nia." "Yes?" "The Harmon flag on page 41, the indemnity clause. Did you read the full subsection?" 3 times. "And? If they trigger that clause, your company absorbs liability that should sit with their insurance carrier. It's written ambiguously on purpose. I'd push back on the specific language in section 41C before signing anything." He looked at her for 3 full seconds. "Get me Harmon's attorney on the phone by 2 o'clock. "Already on your calendar." He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a smile she had ever seen on his face, just a slight ease in the jaw, a fractional shift. He went back into his office. She stared at the phone on her desk. It was dark. No calls, no texts. She thought, today is a quiet day. She was careful never to feel too relieved about the quiet days, because relief was just hope in a thinner coat, and hope was how you ended up devastated. She found out later, much later, that on that same morning, Lorenzo had asked his head of building security, a former DEA analyst named Gerald Pruitt, to quietly pull the exterior camera footage from the previous night. He did not tell Gerald why. Gerald did not ask. Gerald was very good at his job in the same way Lorenzo was good at his. He understood that questions were sometimes more expensive than answers, and he knew when to simply observe. What he found on the tape was this: a dark green sedan parked across from the building's service entrance, engine running, arriving at 6:53 in the evening and remaining until 8:41. The driver never got out. The plates came back to a holding company registered in Delaware with no other footprint. Gerald flagged the report and sent it up. Lorenzo read it at lunch. He set it face down on his desk. He ate his lunch. He thought about a woman standing at a window with her hand pressed to the glass, trying very hard not to make a sound. He thought about the 8-ring phone call with no message. He thought about the way she positioned herself when she walked into a room, never with her back to a door, always with a visual on the nearest exit, which he had noticed months ago and filed away as a habit without yet understanding its source. He picked up his desk phone and called Gerald back. "The sedan," he said. "I want to know who the driver is, not the company, the person." "That'll take a day or two." "Then it'll take a day or two." He hung up. He pulled the Harmon contracts toward him and read from page 41. That evening, Nia stayed late again. This was her pattern. She had honed it the way you hone anything you depend on for survival. Leave too early, and the street was crowded, full of the chaotic shuffle of people heading to subways and restaurants and anywhere but here, and in that chaos he could appear right next to her, and no one would register the proximity as a threat. Leave too late, and the street was empty and quiet, and that was worse for different reasons. She had calculated that 7:15 was usually the safest window. The dinner crowds were moving in, the bars were filling, there were people but not too many, and she walked the 6 blocks to the subway with her keys in her hand and her AirPods in, but no music playing. Tonight she miscalculated. She came out of the building at 7:08, and he was already there. Not Marcus. Not yet. Just the sedan, parked across the street with the engine running, windows dark. She stopped on the top step and felt her chest tighten in the specific way it always did, the way that no breathing exercise or therapy worksheet had ever fully fixed. It was a full-body response, her nervous system doing what it had been trained by 2 years of this to do. Shut down unnecessary functions, prepare for something bad. She stood there. She could go back inside. She could call a car. She could keep walking and pretend she didn't see it. She was considering the third option when the lobby door behind her opened. "You're still here." It was Lorenzo. Coat on, bag over one shoulder, not looking at his phone for once. He looked at her face and then, with the quiet efficiency of a man who reads rooms professionally, he looked at exactly what she was looking at. The sedan. His expression didn't change. That was one of the things about him. Whatever happened behind his face stayed there. You only ever saw what he decided to show you. "I'll walk out with you," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even really an offer. It was just a statement of fact, delivered without drama, and Nia was too tired and too scared to argue with it. They walked down the steps together. The sedan's engine idled. Lorenzo walked steadily, not fast, his hands in his coat pockets, his eyes ahead. He was not performing fearlessness. She had known enough pretenders to recognize the performance. This was just what he actually was, a man who had made peace with being looked at by dangerous things. At the corner, he stopped. "Your subway?" "1 block east." Then 1 block east. They walked it. At the entrance, he stopped again. "Nia." She turned to look at him. The train was rumbling somewhere below. The rain had picked up again. "If there's something happening," he said, "you should tell me." She thought about lying. She was very practiced at lying, at the smooth professional deflection she had turned into an art form over 2 years. "I'm fine. Everything's fine. Just tired." She had said those words so many times they had lost all shape, but something about the way he said, "If there's something happening," not "Are you okay?" not "Is everything all right?" The specificity of it, the absence of pressure, made the lie stick in her throat. "I'm okay." she said anyway. He looked at her for a moment. All right, he said. He turned and walked back the way they came. She stood at the top of the subway steps and watched him go, and she felt something she couldn't immediately name. Not safety, exactly, not relief, something rawer than that. Something that scared her a little, because she had spent a very long time not trusting the feeling of being seen. She went down the stairs. Behind her, 2 blocks back, the sedan pulled out of its spot and turned the corner. Gerald's report came in at 9:47 the next morning. Marcus Hale, 34. Former logistics manager, currently listed as self-employed, previous address in Harlem, current address a sublease in Astoria. 2 civil complaints filed against him in the past 3 years. Both withdrawn. No criminal record. The withdrawals were the detail that sat wrong. Lorenzo read the report twice. Then he called Gerald and said, "Get me everything you can find on those 2 civil complaints. Who filed them? Why they were dropped." "You think this guy's been through this before?" "I think 2 people filed complaints and both changed their minds," Lorenzo said. "That's a pattern." He set the report in the center of his desk. Outside his office, he could hear Nia on the phone with someone from the Harmon legal team, her voice precise and professional, and carrying that particular tone she used when she was making someone understand they had made an error without ever explicitly saying so. She was good at that, at conveying weight without raising her pitch, at making a point land without letting it become a confrontation. He wondered how long she had practiced keeping her voice that steady. He wondered what it cost her. He pulled the report back toward him and kept reading. 3 days passed. In those 3 days, Nia received 41 calls from the unknown number. She documented them the way she documented everything. In a notes app she kept locked with timestamps because some part of her had always known she would eventually need proof of something. She had been keeping the log for 8 months. She had never shown it to anyone. In those same 3 days, Lorenzo quietly approved a change to the building's exterior security rotation without running it through the normal approval chain, adding 2 additional personnel to the evening shift with specific instructions about the vehicle across the street. He did not tell Nia this. He also did not tell her that he had made a phone call to a man named Doyle, who was not affiliated with any legitimate business, who owed him a significant favor, and who had spent the last 48 hours developing a fairly comprehensive picture of Marcus Hale's daily routine. He was not going to do anything with that information yet. He was a patient man. He had built everything he had by understanding that timing was everything, and that the right move made too early could be as costly as the wrong move made at all. But he wanted to know. Knowing was its own kind of power. On the 4th day, Nia came in with a sealed envelope. She set it on his desk at 8:03, before he had even taken his coat off. "What's this?" he asked. "My resignation," she said. Her voice was absolutely steady. Her hands were not. He looked at the envelope. He looked at her. He set his bag down on the chair by the window, slowly, without taking his eyes off her. "No," he said. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm not accepting it." "Mr. Devereaux, you can't—" "I can," he said, "and I'm not." He picked the envelope up and placed it in the top drawer of his desk and closed the drawer. "You're the best secretary I've had in 11 years. I'm not going to lose you because someone is making you feel like you need to disappear." The silence that followed was about 4 seconds long. To Nia, it felt considerably longer. "I don't know what you think is Nia." He said her name the way he said everything, without decoration, without apology. "You don't have to explain anything to me right now, but I need you to hear this." He sat down, put both hands flat on his desk, and looked at her directly. "Whatever is happening is not your problem to solve alone, and it is not a reason to leave this building." She stood there with the quiet, stunned look of someone who had been braced for a wall and walked through a door instead. She said, "Okay." Just that. "Okay." She went back to her desk. She sat down. She opened the Harmon file. Her hands were still shaking, but she didn't let herself look at them, and after a few minutes they stopped. The drawer where he'd put her resignation letter stayed closed for 3 days. Nia knew because she looked at it every morning when she set his coffee down. Not staring, just a flicker, the way your eyes find an old scar without your permission. The envelope was in there with whatever else he kept in that top drawer, And he never once acknowledged it again, and neither did she. And somehow, that silence between them felt more binding than anything they could have said out loud. She told herself it was fine. She told herself she was relieved. She wasn't entirely sure she was telling herself the truth. The Thursday after she'd tried to quit, Nia arrived at 7:40 and found a woman sitting in the lobby. Early 40s, sharp blazer, the kind of posture you get from years of being in rooms where you had to prove you belonged. The woman looked up from her phone when Nia stepped off the elevator. "You're Nia Brooks?" "I am." "Sandra Reeves, Building Security Operations." She stood and extended a hand. Her grip was firm without being performative. "Mr. Devereaux asked me to speak with you this morning about some updated security protocols." Nia looked at her for a moment. "He didn't tell me about this." "No," Sandra said. "He told me to tell you that if you walked away from this conversation, he'd respect that, but he'd like you to stay." That was the thing about Lorenzo Sick. He was always 3 steps ahead of your resistance. He never pushed. He just removed the friction so that saying no required more effort than saying yes. Nia stayed. They sat in the small conference room off the main hall, the one that looked out over the elevator bank. Sandra had a folder, but she didn't open it right away. She put it on the table and set her hands on top of it and looked at Nia directly. "I'm going to be honest with you," Sandra said. "We're aware of the vehicle that's been parked outside this building. We've identified the registered owner, and we've made some changes to the evening security rotation that I want to walk you through." Nia felt the floor shift slightly beneath her. Not literally, just that internal lurch when you realize someone has been watching the thing you've been pretending isn't there. "He told you," she said. "He asked us to look into some irregularities. The rest we found ourselves." "That's not—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "I didn't ask for this. I know. I didn't ask him to do any of this. I know," Sandra said again, and she said it without any particular softness, just plain acknowledgement, which Nia found easier to absorb than sympathy. "But it's done. So the question is what you want to do with it." Nia looked at the folder on the table. She didn't touch it. "What's in there?" "Camera stills, timestamps, documentation of 14 separate instances over the last 3 weeks in which the same vehicle was parked in observable range of this building during your working hours." Sandra paused. "There may be more before that. We only went back 3 weeks." 14 times. She had noticed the car herself maybe 7 or 8 times and had spent significant energy convincing herself she was being paranoid. 14 was not paranoia. 14 was a campaign. Her throat tightened in the specific way it always did when the reality of it landed somewhere she'd been trying to keep it out of. "Okay," she said. "Okay, you want to see the file? Or, okay, I understand." She pulled the folder across the table and opened it. She looked at the first photo for a long time. It was a still from the exterior camera, gray and slightly grainy the way security footage always is, but clear enough. The sedan, the angle of the driver's window, the timestamp, 7:22 p.m., 11 days ago. She had stayed late that night because she'd been finishing the quarterly report summary, and she remembered standing in the kitchen making tea at around 7 and thinking 1 more hour, and the whole time he had been sitting out there in the dark. She closed the folder. "I want copies of all of this," she said. "Already made," Sandra said. "There's a packet for you. And I've been asked to connect you with an attorney in our legal department who specializes in civil harassment law, if that's something you want to pursue." Nia looked at the table. "Does he know what's in this file? Lorenzo? Does he know the specifics?" "He knows the vehicle. He knows the frequency." Sandra chose her next words with care. "He knows enough to be concerned." Nia nodded once. She picked up the folder. She went back to her desk. She sat down and put the folder in her bag and did not open it again for the rest of the day. She answered 12 emails. She rescheduled 2 meetings. She took meticulous notes during a conference call about a property acquisition in Jersey City. She did everything she was supposed to do, and she did it well. And at 5:15, she got up to refill Lorenzo's coffee, and when she came back to her desk, her phone was lit up with 6 missed calls. 6. In 22 minutes. She sat down. She set the phone face down on the desk. She stared at her monitor. The office was still full, people packing up, a cluster of voices from the accounting bullpen down the hall. Ordinary Thursday sounds. The phone sat dark and face down, and she could feel it, the way you feel a hot stove without touching it, just the radiant awareness of a thing that could hurt you. She picked it up and turned it over. The missed calls were from a number she didn't know, different from the usual one. New number. He'd switched numbers, which meant he'd noticed somehow that she'd stopped answering the old one. The adaptation. That was always the part that unmade her. Not the calls, not the car. The fact that when she found a way to cope, he found a way around it. There was a persistence to it that felt less like obsession and more like methodology. Like she was a problem he had committed to solving. She went to the restroom. She ran cold water over her wrists, which was something a therapist had told her to do 2 years ago, and which she had never stopped doing because it worked well enough. It brought her back into her body when her body had decided to evacuate. She looked at herself in the mirror. Dark circles, jaw tight, eyes that looked older than they should. She thought, I am so tired. Not dramatic tired, not the kind you post about. The bone-deep, cellular tired that comes from spending years on alert. She was tired of her own hypervigilance, tired of the mental math she ran every time she walked through a door, tired of checking her rear-view mirror in Ubers and sitting with her back against the wall in restaurants and calculating escape routes in rooms that posed no actual threat to her. She dried her hands. She went back to her desk. At 6:02, Lorenzo came out of his office with his coat already on and stopped at her desk the way he had started doing. Not every evening, not obviously, but often enough. Still here? Finishing the Harmon Amendment notes, 15 minutes. He looked at her face. Not at her eyes exactly. At her face, the whole composition of it. The way you look at something when you're trying to read the temperature of it. I'll be downstairs, he said. Don't rush. She wanted to tell him he didn't need to wait. She had said that before, and he had simply looked at her like she'd said something in a language he didn't speak, so she had stopped saying it. Okay, she said. He left. She finished the notes in 12 minutes, not 15. She got her coat and her bag. She checked her phone. 2 more calls from the new number, both while she'd been typing. She put the phone in her bag without listening to the voicemails. She took the elevator down. Lorenzo was standing near the lobby desk with Gerald, the two of them speaking quietly. They stopped when she appeared. Gerald gave her a nod, professional, neutral, and moved away. Lorenzo fell into step beside her without ceremony, the way they had both begun to accept as ordinary, even though nothing about it was ordinary. Outside, the October air had sharpened into genuine cold. The kind that reminds you summer was a different era. Nia turned up her collar, and they walked. She saw the sedan immediately. New spot tonight. Farther down the block, different angle. But the same car, same running engine, same dark window. Lorenzo saw it too. She knew because his pace didn't change, but something in the set of his shoulders did. A barely perceptible gathering, like a man who has just confirmed a suspicion and is now deciding what to do about it. He moved it, she said. She said it before she'd decided to say it, the words just arriving. Lorenzo didn't respond right away. They kept walking. How long? He said finally. She didn't pretend not to understand the question. 2 years, more or less, since I ended it. You ended the relationship. Yes. They reached her subway entrance. He stopped. She stopped. He was looking down the block at the sedan, not at her, and she watched the side of his face the way you watch weather, trying to read what's coming. Has he touched you? Lorenzo asked. The question was quiet, almost clinical. But it wasn't clinical, she knew, because of the slight tension at the corner of his jaw that appeared when he asked it. Once, she said. Early on. He grabbed my wrist outside my old apartment building. She paused. Nothing since then that I could... Nothing that would hold up. Lorenzo looked at her then. Nothing that would hold up, he repeated, not as a question, just turning the phrase over, like he was identifying something. He's very careful, she said. He knows exactly how far to go. The silence that followed had weight to it. Down the block, the sedan idled. Up above, a plane crossed the dark sky, its blinking light steady and indifferent. Go home, Lorenzo said. Take a car, not the subway. I'll have Gerald arrange it. Don't argue. She didn't argue. She was too tired to argue. And part of her, the part that had been managing this alone for 23 months, was so exhausted by the effort of managing it alone that the idea of letting someone else carry even one corner of it made her chest ache with something she couldn't afford to fully feel right now. The car came in 4 minutes. She got in. She didn't look back, but she knew Lorenzo was still standing there, and she knew he was watching the sedan, and she knew the sedan's driver knew he was being watched. The next morning, Nia found out what Lorenzo did when he got home. She found out because Gerald told her, obliquely, in the elevator, when he said, "The vehicle won't be at that location again." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means the permit for that loading zone was flagged with the city," Gerald said, and his voice was entirely neutral. "Turns out the vehicle had 3 outstanding violations. They towed it at 11 p.m. Nia stared at him. Is that completely within the bounds of existing municipal code?" Gerald said. He pressed the button for the 34th floor. "Have a good morning, Ms. Brooks." She spent the first 2 hours of the day trying to decide how she felt about this. She wasn't naive. She understood what Lorenzo Devereaux was and wasn't, in the same way you understand that a city operates on both its visible infrastructure and its invisible one. Both are real, both matter, and you would be a fool to pretend the invisible one doesn't exist just because you can't see it clearly. She had always understood this about him. It was part of why she had trusted the building's security in the first place. But this was different from a security team. This was Lorenzo himself making a call that moved a specific piece of Marcus's world. That scared her a little. Not the way Marcus scared her, not with threat. With something more complicated. With the awareness that she had become something to be protected, which meant she was visible to someone capable of very significant force, which meant she was no longer entirely in charge of what happened around her. She didn't know if that was better or worse. She didn't get to decide, because at 10:43 her phone rang with the new unknown number and she rejected it, and at 10:44 it rang again, and this time she answered it. She didn't say anything. Neither did he for a moment. Then Marcus said, "I just need 5 minutes." His voice was the same as it always was, measured, reasonable. The voice of a man who had carefully constructed the image of a man who just wanted to talk. "I have nothing to say to you," Nia said. "Baby, don't. I see you, Nia. I see you going into that building every day with that man, and I just need you to... You need to stop calling me," she said. "You need to stop parking outside my workplace. You need to stop." "I'm not doing anything wrong," he said, and the reasonableness in his voice sharpened slightly, like a knife shifting under cloth. "I haven't touched you. I'm just trying to reach you because you won't respond, and I'm worried about you." "You don't get to be worried about me. I love you." "I know you think you do." She kept her voice flat. This was the conversation she had in her head 100 times, and the practice helped mostly. "That's not what this is. What you're doing is not love, and you need to stop." "Who told you that?" His voice changed slightly, not louder, but tighter. "Was it him? Your boss? Has he been—" "Goodbye, Marcus." She hung up. She sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then she opened her call log, screenshotted the timestamp, added it to the Notes app with the others, and went back to the Harmon amendment. Her hands didn't shake this time. She didn't examine why. At 1:15, Lorenzo had a lunch meeting that ran 40 minutes over, and when he came back, he looked the way he sometimes did after long negotiations. Not tired exactly, but recalibrated, the way a machine looks after it's been running at capacity and finally throttled back. He came past her desk and stopped. "Did anything come in from Reeves this morning?" "A brief at 11. I forwarded it to your secure inbox." "Good." He didn't move immediately. He stood there a second, hand on the back of the chair beside her desk. Not sitting, just resting. "How are you doing?" The way he asked it was different from, "Are you okay?" It was an actual inquiry, specific and direct, and it caught her off guard the way his questions sometimes did. "He called," she said. "This morning. New number." Lorenzo's hand didn't move on the chair. "Did you answer?" "Yes." A pause. "Why?" "Because I needed him to know I'm not afraid to pick up the phone." She looked at her monitor. Fear is how he controls people. If I always screen his calls, he knows he has that over me. I wanted him to hear my voice be steady. Lorenzo looked at her for a long moment. Was it? He asked. Steady? She met his eyes. Yes, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not softening exactly, more like acknowledgement. The way you look at someone when they've surprised you and you respect the surprise. Document the call, he said. Already did. He went into his office. The week turned. The brief warmth in the air gave up entirely, and New York settled into its November posture. Gray, dense, cold in the specific way that makes the lights inside every building look warmer by contrast. Nia bought a heavier coat. She stopped taking the subway. Gerald had quietly arranged a standing car service, billed somewhere in the operations budget, and she had accepted it after 2 days of internal debate that she'd resolved by telling herself it was a security measure and not charity and not dependence. She was becoming aware that she was letting things happen that she normally would have deflected. She examined this carefully. She was not someone who let people help her easily. She had learned too young that needing help gave people something over you, and then you owed them something, and then the owing became its own trap. 2 years with Marcus had not taught her that lesson. She'd known it long before him, but he had reinforced it until it felt like fact. Now Lorenzo was moving quietly around the edges of her situation, and she was letting him, and she didn't entirely trust her own reasons for it. She thought, is this just because I'm exhausted? She thought, is this because I've run out of ways to do this alone? She thought, does it matter? She didn't have a clean answer for any of those. What she had instead was a Wednesday afternoon when she walked into the small kitchen to get water and found Lorenzo already in there, standing at the counter eating something from a takeout container with the kind of single-focused efficiency he applied to everything. He looked up when she came in. There's extra, he said, from the Thai place on Lex. I'm fine. You've said that 11 times this week, and I've watched you eat exactly 1 full meal in this building. She stopped at the water dispenser and looked at him. Are you keeping track of when I eat? I'm keeping track of my employees' basic welfare, yes. You don't do that with anyone else. I do it with everyone, he said. You just notice it more because yours concerns me more right now. She filled her water glass. She stood at the counter and drank half of it. He slid the takeout container slightly toward her without saying anything. She took a pair of chopsticks from the holder on the counter and ate standing up, and they didn't speak for about 4 minutes, which should have been uncomfortable and inexplicably wasn't. Why did you stay in New York? He asked finally. If he's here, why not go somewhere else? She set the chopsticks down. Because I grew up here. Because my mother is 40 minutes from this office. Because I've had this job for 14 months and it's the first job I've ever had where I'm genuinely good at it and valued for being good at it. She paused. And because running from someone teaches you to keep running. I ran from my last apartment, my last job, She stopped. I'm done running. He looked at her across the narrow counter. Okay, he said. Just that. Okay. The same word she'd given him, back at the beginning. She picked the chopsticks back up. 3 days later, Marcus Hale walked into the building lobby. Not the exterior, the lobby. Past the revolving doors. He told the front desk he was there to see a Ms. Brooks, that he was a personal acquaintance, that he'd been expected. He said it with the easy confidence of someone who had spent years making unreasonable things sound procedural. The desk associate was new, 2 weeks in, not yet versed in the specific instructions Gerald had distributed about unauthorized visitors. Marcus made it to the elevator bank. He made it into an elevator. He pressed 34. Nia was at her desk when the elevator doors opened across the hall. She was mid-sentence in a phone call, notepad in her left hand. She looked up with the automatic attention she always gave arriving visitors, and her sentence stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. The notepad hit the desk. Marcus stepped out of the elevator smiling, casual, like he'd just come from a lunch meeting, like this was the most natural thing in the world, him standing 34 floors above the city in the building where she'd built herself something stable, contaminating it just by being in it. Hey, he said, like they were running into each other at a coffee shop. On the phone, the voice on the other end said something. Nia did not hear it. She was looking at Marcus, and Marcus was looking at her, and the 30 feet between them felt like nothing, like no distance at all. Nia? The voice on the phone again. She said very quietly into the phone, "I'll call you back." She hung up. The office around her had gone slightly still. A few people looking over, not fully understanding what they were seeing, just registering the atmospheric shift that happens when something wrong enters a space that's supposed to be safe. Marcus crossed the floor toward her desk. He was still smiling. "You haven't been answering. I just needed to see you." "You can't be here," she said. "I'm not doing anything," he said. "I just want to talk." "You can't be here, Marcus." 5 minutes. That's all. I'm not here to cause problems. He reached the desk and put both hands on the edge of it, leaning slightly, dropping his voice. "You can't just cut me off and expect me to disappear. I have feelings too. I matter too." The thing about this moment, the thing that would stay with her later, was not the fear. She was afraid, yes. Her pulse was in her throat and her hands had gone cold. But underneath the fear there was something else, something that had been building for months and now had a sharp edge to it. It was anger, quiet, focused, clarifying. She stood up. She stood up from her desk and she looked at him at his full height, and she said clearly enough that 2 people behind her definitely heard it, "Get out of this building." Marcus's smile stayed, but his eyes changed. Something moved behind them. Not surprise, exactly. Recalibration. "You're being dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic." Her voice was absolutely steady. "You need to leave. Now." "Nia? Is there a problem?" The voice came from behind her. She had not heard Lorenzo's office door open. She did not know how long he had been standing there, but the weight of his presence entered the room before she fully turned to confirm it, and she watched Marcus's eyes travel from her face to the space behind her and do the thing they always did when Marcus encountered something he hadn't fully prepared for. A quick, recalculating stillness, like a man running new numbers. Lorenzo came to stand beside her desk, not in front of her, Baskaka. "Mom?" Beside her. His hands were in his pockets. He looked at Marcus with the complete, unhurried attention of a man who has assessed a situation in under 3 seconds and found it manageable. "Who are you?" he asked. Marcus smiled his polished smile. "An old friend. I was just catching up with Nia." "She asked you to leave." "We're in the middle of a conversation." "She asked you to leave," Lorenzo said again, exactly the same way, exactly the same volume, which was very quiet. "That's not a negotiation. That's information." The smile on Marcus's face held, but something underneath it shifted. A fault line, slight, barely visible, but there. "Sir, with all respect, Gerald." Lorenzo didn't raise his voice. He didn't even turn his head. "Please see this gentleman to the lobby." Gerald appeared from the direction of the hall with 2 building security personnel that Nia had not seen arrive. They positioned themselves with the practiced ease of people who did this regularly, and Marcus looked at them and then at Lorenzo, and the smile finally, fully, left his face. He looked at Nia. "This isn't over," he said. It was quiet, conversational, the way he said everything. Lorenzo stepped fractionally forward, just 1 step, barely perceptible. And that 1 step crossed some invisible threshold, because Marcus pulled his gaze away from Nia and put it back on Lorenzo and held it there for exactly 2 seconds before he turned and walked toward the elevator with Gerald's hand on his arm. The doors closed. The floor exhaled. Nia stood at her desk, both hands flat on the surface, head slightly down. She was breathing, deliberately and carefully, the way you do when you're trying to make your body believe everything is fine before your mind is caught up. Lorenzo stood beside her for a moment without speaking. Then he said quietly, just for her, "Look at me." She looked up. "You're okay," he said. "I know," she said. But her voice cracked on the second word, barely, the smallest fracture, and she hated it, and he saw it, and he did not look away. "Sit down," he said gently. She sat. He pulled up the chair from the nearby station and sat across from her, forearms on his knees, head level with hers. "He said it's not over," she said. "I heard him. He means it. He always means what he says. That's the... She stopped, pressed her fingers to her mouth for a second, composing. He doesn't make threats he can't follow through on. Lorenzo was quiet for a moment. Neither do I, he said. She looked at him. He was looking back at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the careful professional neutrality he wore in meetings, not the focused efficiency he brought to problems. This was something more fundamental. This was a man telling her something true. He came into this building, Lorenzo said. He walked up to your desk. He stood over you and told you it isn't over. Yes. That's the last time that happens. Nia held his gaze. You can't promise that, she said. Watch me, he said. And the thing was, the terrifying, complicated, overwhelming thing, was that she believed him. She believed him not because he was powerful, not because he had money or men at his disposal, or the kind of quiet authority that makes rooms rearrange themselves. She believed him because in the 6 weeks since he had watched her cry alone at a window and chosen not to look away, he had not once said something he didn't mean, and he had not once made her feel like her safety was a burden he was generously carrying. He had made her feel like it mattered, like she mattered. And Marcus Hale had spent 2 years carefully, systematically, and deliberately dismantling her ability to believe that about herself. And the damage had been so thorough that a single sentence from Lorenzo Devereaux, "Watch me," had cracked something open in her chest that she wasn't ready to name and wasn't sure she could close again. She looked at her desk, the notepad, the phone, the ordinary equipment of her ordinary job. I need to call back the person from the Harmon team, she said. I hung up on them. Lorenzo stood. I'll have the attorney follow up. He went back to his office. He did not close the door all the way. She sat there for a moment in the open air of that, the door not quite closed, the floor still humming quietly with the ordinary sounds of people working. And she thought about Marcus's face when he'd said, "This isn't over." And she thought about Lorenzo's face when he'd said, "Watch me." And she understood with a cold clarity that whatever came next, the story had shifted into something none of them could step back from. Marcus had entered the building. He had crossed a line he couldn't uncross, and Lorenzo had drawn one of his own. Nia picked up her phone and dialed back the Harmon attorney, and her voice when she spoke was steady and professional and gave nothing away. And underneath the steadiness, something that had been very quietly breaking for a very long time began, with enormous difficulty, to hold. The restraining order application sat on Lorenzo's desk for 48 hours before anyone filed it. Not because of delay, because the attorney, a compact, precise woman named Claire Ashworth, who had spent 12 years in civil harassment law and had the specific patience of someone who had heard every variation of "but he never technically hurt me," needed Nia to come in person and sign the documentation herself. No proxy, no representative. Her signature, her statement, her face in that office acknowledging that what was happening to her was real enough to put in writing and hand to a court. Nia kept rescheduling, not canceling. Rescheduling. There was a difference, she told herself. Canceling meant she wasn't going to do it. Rescheduling meant she was going to do it. Just not yet. Just not today. Just not while Marcus's voice from 2 days ago was still sitting in her chest like something she'd accidentally swallowed. This isn't over. Claire Ashworth called on Friday morning and Nia sent it to voicemail. She sent it to voicemail, and then she sat at her desk and answered 40 emails and reformatted a contract summary and ordered Lorenzo's lunch. And at 12:40, she went to the restroom and stood over the sink with the cold water running and looked at herself and said very quietly to her own reflection, "What are you doing?" Not a question, just a statement pointed at herself like a finger. She knew what she was doing. She was waiting for the situation to resolve itself, which was what she always did, which had never once worked, which was the same pattern she had been running for 2 years while the situation got progressively worse. She knew this. She had known it for months, knowing it hadn't helped. She dried her hands. She called Claire Ashworth back from the restroom. "Monday morning," she said when Claire picked up. 8:30, I'll be there." "Good," Claire said simply. No ceremony. Nia hung up. She went back to her desk. Lorenzo was standing near the window on a call, visible through the glass of his office. He had his back to her, one hand in his pocket, the other holding his phone, and he was looking out at the city the way he sometimes did, like he was reading it, like the skyline was a document he needed to understand before he could move forward. She watched him for a moment without meaning to. She looked back at her monitor. She thought, Monday, 8:30. She thought, 4 days. The weekend arrived and Nia made herself do ordinary things. She called her mother Saturday morning and talked for 40 minutes about nothing significant. Her mother's neighbor's new dog, a recipe that hadn't worked, the specific disappointment of a television series that had started strong and collapsed in its 3rd season. Her mother asked if she was eating. Nia said yes. Her mother said she sounded tired. Nia said she was fine. Her mother had a way of receiving that answer, a brief pause, barely a second, that communicated clearly that she wasn't convinced but wasn't going to push. They had an understanding, Nia and her mother. They loved each other in the efficient, practical way of two women who had both learned early that the world required a certain amount of forward motion, and forward motion didn't leave a lot of room for prolonged examination of pain. She didn't tell her mother about Marcus. She hadn't in 2 years. She told herself it was because she didn't want her mother to worry. This was partially true. The other part, the part she examined less often, was that telling her mother would make it undeniably real in the specific way that other people's knowledge makes things real. As long as only she knew the full shape of it, she retained some control over the narrative. Once it spread, it belonged to other people's reactions, other people's fear, other people's impulse to fix or flee or say the wrong thing. She hung up the call and made coffee and stood at her apartment window for a while. Her building was on the 4th floor of a walk-up in Crown Heights. The window looked out on the street below. A good block, mostly families, a laundromat on the corner that played old R&B on Saturday mornings, loud enough to hear from up here. She had loved this apartment when she'd found it. She had loved this block. She didn't love looking out her window anymore. She stood there anyway. She looked at every car on the street, one by one, registering make and color and whether the engine appeared to be running. She did this the way you do a thing you've done so many times it precedes thought. She got to the end of the block, found nothing alarming, and felt the brief, insufficient relief of a threat not yet materialized. She left the window. She made herself eat something. She spent Sunday preparing for Monday. Claire Ashworth's office was in Midtown, 8th floor of a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and ambition. Claire herself was already at her desk when Nia arrived at 8:22, which told Nia something useful about her. They shook hands. They sat. Claire had a clean desk and a habit of very direct eye contact that Nia found, initially slightly uncomfortable, and then gradually steadying. There was something reliable about a person who looked at you straight. "I want to go through the documentation you've compiled," Claire said. "Everything. The call log, the timestamps, the building footage, all of it. Then I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them as precisely as you can. Exact dates where you have them, approximate where you don't. Don't estimate generously. Don't fill in gaps you're not sure of. Does that make sense?" "Yes." "Good." She opened a folder. "When did the first incident occur that you would characterize as harassment rather than contact from a former partner?" Nia thought about it, genuinely thought, didn't just reach for the first answer available. 14 days after I ended the relationship, she said. He showed up outside my apartment at 11 at night. I hadn't told him my new address. She paused. He'd gotten it from a mutual friend without telling her why he wanted it. Claire wrote something. "And you'd moved specifically to put distance between you?" "Yes." "Did you communicate clearly at any point that you did not want contact?" "In the message I sent when I ended the relationship, and twice after that on the phone. And—" She stopped. There was a specific memory pushing up that she usually kept pushed down. "And once in person, at the restaurant where he found me having lunch with a coworker about 3 months after the breakup. I told him directly, with my coworker there as a witness, to stop contacting me." "What did he say?" She remembered his face. The reasonableness of it. The way he'd smiled at her coworker like they were all having a friendly conversation. "He said I was confused and I'd feel differently when I'd had time to think." Claire looked up from her notes. "Did your coworker document what she witnessed?" "She doesn't know what she witnessed," Nia said. "She thought it was an awkward run-in with an ex. I told her it was nothing." Claire set her pen down. "Nia," she said, and her voice shifted a register. Not softer exactly, but more direct. I'm going to tell you something that isn't a criticism, it's just information. The pattern you're describing, the minimizing, the not telling people, the managing of others' perceptions of the situation, that pattern is one of the main reasons harassment cases are difficult to prosecute. Not because they're not real, because victims have spent so long protecting other people from the reality of what's happening that there are very few external witnesses to it. Nia looked at her hands in her lap. I know, she said. The good news, Claire continued, picking the pen back up, is that you have a call log going back 8 months, building security documentation, and a physical incursion into a secure workplace with multiple witnesses. That's considerably more than most people walk in here with. She made another note. We have enough to file. The question is whether you want to pursue a temporary restraining order first, which moves faster but requires a hearing, or go directly for a civil harassment injunction, which takes longer but carries more weight. They spent another 40 minutes going through it. By the time Nia walked out at 10:15, there was a filing in motion. Not a promise, not a plan, actual paperwork, with her actual signature, moving through an actual system. She stood on the sidewalk outside the building and took a breath of cold air. She felt neither relieved nor victorious. She felt like someone who had finally taken out a splinter that had been in her palm for 2 years, and the relief of its removal was somewhat offset by the rawness of the wound underneath. She took the subway back to work. Lorenzo asked no questions when she came in at 10:47. He looked at her face when she walked past his office door, that brief reading look, and then he went back to whatever document was open in front of him. At 11:30, he called her on the internal line. Lunch, he said. Conference room 2. Bring whatever you're working on. They ate lunch in the conference room 3 or 4 times a week now, which had started approximately 9 days ago and which neither of them had explicitly decided. It had happened the way things sometimes happen around Lorenzo, not because he announced them, but because he arranged conditions and let the logical next step occur naturally. She brought the Harmon Amendment revisions. He brought Thai food from the same place as before, which she had begun to suspect was his default when he was buying for 2 and didn't want to make a production of the decision. They worked through lunch. She read edits aloud. He responded. She marked his responses. He refined them. It had a rhythm, and rhythm was one of the things Nia trusted more than most things, because rhythm meant the thing was real and functional and not just a performance of functionality. At some point, he said, without looking up from his copy of the document, "How did this morning go?" She clicked her pen once. Filing is in motion. Good. That was all. She appreciated that he didn't ask for more than that. She also noticed, and filed away, the fact that he had remembered this morning was the appointment without her mentioning it first. The twist, when it came, did not announce itself. That was the thing about the worst moments in Nia's life. None of them had announced themselves. Marcus had not walked into her life looking like a danger. He had walked in looking like attention, which was something she'd been somewhat starved for at 26, working 60 hours a week and coming home to a quiet apartment in a city that could make you feel invisible even when it was crowded with people. He had been attentive and warm and interested, and the transition from those things to what he actually was had been so gradual she hadn't found the border until she was already on the wrong side of it. She thought about this on the Tuesday after she filed, sitting at her desk at 4:40 in the afternoon when her phone rang with a number she recognized. Keisha Morton, her friend from the temp agency, the person who had placed her with Devereaux 14 months ago, one of 3 people in her life who knew the full situation with Marcus, and the only one she'd stayed in regular contact with. She answered. "Hey, you okay?" Keisha's voice was off. Not wrong exactly, but running at a different frequency than usual. Keisha was typically easy and voluble on the phone, the kind of person whose sentences arrived in multiples. Single question, measured delivery. That was not her usual register. "I'm fine," Nia said. "What's going on?" A pause. "I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it without it being bad, so I'm just going to say it." Nia's hand tightened on the phone. "Marcus called me," Keisha said. The office sounds around, Nia continued. Keyboard clicks, a distant phone, someone's muffled conversation from behind a closed door. But they seem to arrive from slightly farther away now, like a volume dial being turned down 2 notches. "When?" Nia said. "Yesterday. And The Sunday before that. I didn't pick up the first time. Yesterday I picked up because I didn't recognize the number. Keisha. I know. I should have. Listen, he didn't seem angry or threatening. He sounded completely calm and normal, and she stopped herself. He said he was worried about you, that you'd been under a lot of stress and he was concerned about your mental health. The cold that moved through Nia's body was familiar. She had felt it before, the specific chill of recognizing a tactic in motion. What did you tell him? She said. Her voice was very careful. Nothing. I told him I hadn't spoken to you recently, that's not true, but I didn't know what else to. Nia, I'm so sorry, but at the end of the call, before I could hang up, he asked. Another pause. Keisha was struggling with something. He asked if you were still at the same job, and I said yes before I thought about it. That was all I said, just yes. Nia sat very still. She said, he already knew where I worked, Keisha. I know, but he also asked if you'd moved recently, and Nia, I'm so sorry, I told him no. He acted like he already knew, and I just confirmed it. The apartment. Her apartment in Crown Heights. She had not moved from that apartment. She had not moved because moving meant running, and she had decided she was done running. But the security of staying had been partly predicated on the belief that Marcus didn't know her current address, that whatever he'd gotten from the mutual friend 18 months ago was an old address, the place before Crown Heights, the sublet in Bed-Stuy she'd left. Did he ask for the address? Nia said. No. Did you give it to him? No, Nia, I promise. Just the confirmation that you hadn't moved. I'm sorry, and I'm so. Stop. She heard the sharpness in her own voice and pulled it back. Keisha had not done this with intent. Keisha was one of the people she trusted, and Marcus was very, very good at extracting information from people who didn't know they were being extracted from. It's okay. You didn't know. I should have. You didn't know, Nia said. I'll call you back. She hung up. She sat at her desk with the phone in her hand and her mind running very fast through a calculation that had a limited number of conclusions, none of them good. He knew she was at the same job. That was already established. He'd shown up here. He knew she hadn't moved, which meant the only remaining unknown in his possession was the exact address. Crown Heights was not a small neighborhood, but Marcus Hale was not a man who gave up on a problem. She thought about the sedan, how it had been outside her workplace for 14 documented instances before she was aware of it. She thought about the way he'd shown up at the restaurant where she'd had lunch with a coworker 3 months after the breakup, at a restaurant she'd never been to with him, that she'd chosen at random from a delivery app. She had told herself at the time that it was a coincidence, that Midtown had a finite number of lunch spots and the intersection of their schedules was just probability. She had not let herself consider the alternative because the alternative was worse. She was considering it now. She got up from her desk. She walked to Lorenzo's office door, which was half open, and knocked twice. He looked up. She came in and closed the door behind her. He straightened in his chair. She stood in the middle of the room and said, I need to tell you something. She told him about the call from Keisha. She told him about the restaurant 3 years ago. The one she'd told herself was coincidence. She told him about a moment 14 months ago, 2 weeks before she'd started the placement at Devereaux Group, when her laptop had behaved strangely, programs opening on their own, battery draining faster than it should. She had attributed it to an aging machine and bought a new one. She had not thought about it again until right now, standing in Lorenzo's office, because she had not wanted to think about what it might mean. Lorenzo listened without moving. When she finished, he said, Did he ever have physical access to your phone, your laptop, either device? She thought about it carefully. There was a period near the end of the relationship when I left my phone on the nightstand. He could have. I didn't have a passcode then. Lorenzo picked up his desk phone and said, Get me Gerald and have Doyle standing by. He put the phone down. He looked at Nia. Sit down. She sat in the chair across from his desk. Is it possible he's been tracking you? He said. Not softly, just directly, the way he did everything. I think, she said, that I have been afraid to ask that question for a long time. Gerald arrived in 4 minutes. Doyle, who Nia had never met before, a thin man in his early 50s with the specific patience of someone who had spent decades in rooms where things couldn't be said directly, arrived in 7. Lorenzo laid out what Nia had told him, briefly, precisely. Doyle looked at Nia. The laptop you replaced. What did you do with it? Donated it. When? 14 months ago, right before I started here. The phone. Do you still have the phone from that period? No, I upgraded. Doyle made a small sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite the opposite. Even without the hardware, if he installed something during the relationship, he may have had access to location data for months without needing the device. Depends what was installed and whether it propagated to your accounts. Nia felt the air in the room change. My accounts, she said. He knew my... We shared a streaming account, and I used his email once or twice to send myself files when my own was acting up. She stopped. He would have had access to that email address. Did you ever sync your contacts or calendar to that email? The cold came back. I used Google Sync, she said. I synced everything. The silence in the room was the specific kind that occurs when a group of people all reach the same conclusion simultaneously, and no one wants to be the first to say it out loud. Doyle said carefully, if he had access to that Google account and you synced your contacts and calendar to it, he would have had access to your location history, your calendar appointments, your contact list, anything associated with that account, for as long as he maintained access and you didn't change the associated credentials. Nia looked at the wall behind Lorenzo's desk. She looked at it for a long time. The restaurant. He had known about the restaurant because it was in her calendar. A lunch appointment with a coworker, address included, added 3 days before. He hadn't run into her. He had been waiting. And before that, the time she'd told herself she was being paranoid when he appeared outside the gym she'd tried, once deciding to build a new routine. The gym address was in her calendar as a recurring appointment, and her mother's building. He'd driven past it once, slowly, when she was leaving. She'd seen him from the corner, and her stomach had dropped, and she'd told herself it was another coincidence. Her mother lived in a neighborhood he sometimes passed through. Her mother's address was in her contacts. Everything, she said. Her voice was very quiet. Everything I did for however long he had access. He knew it all. Doyle nodded once. Gerald looked at Lorenzo. Lorenzo was looking at Nia. His expression was the same as it always was, controlled, contained, but his jaw had a specific quality to it that she had begun, over weeks of proximity, to be able to read. Attention held very carefully in check. What do we need to do? She asked. First, Doyle said, we change every credential associated with that account. Every password, every recovery option, every connected service. Tonight. Okay? Second, we do a device sweep on your current phone and laptop to rule out anything currently active. Okay. Third, he glanced at Lorenzo. Depending on what we find, this may change the nature of what can be filed with the court. Unauthorized access to electronic accounts and use of location data without consent is a criminal matter, not just civil. The word criminal landed differently than it usually does. It didn't feel like a complication. It felt like a door that had just opened. Nia looked at Lorenzo. You knew something like this was possible, she said. Not accusatory, just a recognition. I suspected, he said. I hoped I was wrong. You weren't. No. She looked at her hands. He's been inside my life for 2 years, she said. Not just outside it, inside. She said it slowly, turning the shape of it over in her mind, understanding it as she said it. Every appointment, every address, He's known where I was going before I left. Yes, Lorenzo said. And I was trying to be careful, she said. I was trying to protect myself, and I had already been... She stopped. She pressed her lips together very hard. She was not going to fall apart in this room. She was not. She had made that decision before she'd walked in here, and she was keeping it. I didn't know, she said finally. I didn't know he was already in. You couldn't have, Gerald said. I should have. Nia. Lorenzo's voice was very quiet. She looked at him. You left him. You changed your apartment. You changed your job. You documented every call for 8 months. You filed a legal complaint last week. None of that was nothing. His eyes were steady on her face. He's been one step ahead because he's been cheating. That's not your failure. That's his crime. The word crime sat in the space between them. She breathed. She thought, there are 2 years of places I went, and things I did, and people I saw that he watched. 2 years of me thinking I was building walls while he was already standing inside the room. She thought, how do you process the scale of that? She thought, you don't process it right now. Right now, you change the passwords, and you do the device sweep, and you give Doyle whatever he needs, and you let the legal system do what it's designed to do, and you process the scale of it later when you have the space. Tell me what to do first, she said to Doyle. Doyle reached into his bag and pulled out a laptop. Start with the Google account, he said. They worked in Lorenzo's conference room for 3 hours. Doyle moved through her accounts with the systematic efficiency of someone who had done this before. She didn't ask in what context. Identifying every connected service, every recovery email, every phone number linked to the compromised account. Gerald ran the device sweep on her current phone using software she didn't recognize and would not have known to ask for. At 7:12, Doyle looked up from his screen. He's still in, he said. Nia had been staring at her own screen, and she looked up sharply. The recovery account for your Google is an email address you don't recognize, Doyle said. It's not yours. He added it at some point, probably near the end of the relationship, so that even if you changed your password, the recovery route would send verification to an address he controls. He turned the screen toward her. This is his back door. He's had it this whole time. She looked at the address on the screen. A Gmail account she had never seen before, a random string of letters and numbers. 2 years. He had been reading her calendar, her contacts, her location history for 2 years, and every time she'd changed her password, which she had done 3 times following online advice about digital safety, it hadn't mattered because he owned the recovery route. She had locked the front door and he'd had a key to the back. Doyle closed the screen. I'm going to forward this documentation to Claire Ashworth tonight. This changes what she can file. How? Lorenzo asked from the doorway. He had stayed not intrusively, just present the way he had been for weeks now, a reliable perimeter. Unauthorized access to computer systems. Stalking facilitated by electronic surveillance. In New York, that's a Class E felony minimum. Doyle looked at Nia. He's not just a man who won't leave you alone. He's committed crimes with documentation we can now prove. She absorbed this. He'll know, she said, when I revoke the access. He'll get a notification. Yes, Doyle said. So he'll know we found it. Yes. She looked at Lorenzo. He'll escalate, she said. Lorenzo held her gaze. I know, he said. The room was quiet. Nia looked back at Doyle's closed laptop and thought about Marcus. Somewhere in the city right now, probably with his phone in his hand the way he always had his phone in his hand, and she thought about the moment that notification would arrive. Your recovery email has been removed. And she knew with cold certainty what his face would do when it did, the calm surface cracking for just a second before the methodology kicked back in. She had spent 2 years afraid of what he would do. She was still afraid. She wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But underneath the fear, where before there had been only the exhausted resignation of someone who believed escape was theoretical, there was something else now, something harder and less patient. Revoke it, she said. Doyle looked at her. You're sure? She looked at him steadily. Revoke it, she said again. Doyle opened the laptop. His fingers moved across the keyboard. Somewhere across the city, on a phone in the hand of a man who had spent 2 years believing he was invisible, a notification arrived. The notification went out at 7:41 p.m. Doyle closed the laptop and said nothing. Gerald began packing the device sweep equipment with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood that the next phase of a problem was not his department. Lorenzo stood in the doorway of the conference room and looked at Nia, and Nia looked at the table. The room felt different now. Not calmer. The opposite of calmer. Like the pressure that builds in your ears before a storm breaks. That specific atmospheric weight that your body registers before your mind catches up. He'll move tonight, Nia said. Possibly, Doyle said. Not possibly. She looked up. You don't know him. When he loses control of something, he moves immediately. He doesn't sit with it. She thought about the restaurant, the gym, the way he'd appeared at her workplace within days of her stopping the calls. He needs to reassert. It's the only thing that makes him feel... She stopped. He'll move tonight. Lorenzo pushed off the door frame. Gerald. Already on it. Gerald had his phone out. I'll have 2 additional personnel at her building by 9. Make it 8:30. Done. Nia looked at Lorenzo. I should go home and wait? No, he said. You shouldn't go home at all tonight. She opened her mouth. Not a debate, he said quietly, but with a finality that didn't have room for argument in it. We don't know what he does with that notification. We don't know if he goes to your building or here or somewhere else entirely. Tonight you're not alone in an apartment. She looked at her hands on the table. She wanted to argue. The part of her that had been fiercely, exhaustingly independent for 2 years, the part that had managed this alone and survived it, however barely, that part recoiled from the idea of being relocated like a variable in someone else's equation. But underneath that pride was the memory of the notification going out, and the cold certainty of what Marcus's face had done when it arrived, and she was tired. She was so profoundly, molecularly tired of being the only person standing between herself and whatever he decided to do next. Where? She said. There's a company apartment on 58th, Lorenzo said. Secure building. Doorman who's ex-NYPD. You'll have your own space. She nodded once. She picked up her bag. The company apartment was on the 22nd floor, and it was clean and neutral in the way of spaces that are maintained for function rather than personality. White walls, good furniture, kitchen stocked with the basics. Nia set her bag on the couch and stood in the middle of the living room and looked around at the absence of herself in it. Lorenzo had come up with her. He stood near the door while she walked the perimeter of the space the way she always did in new rooms. Exits, windows, sight lines. There are 2 building security staff in the lobby, he said. Gerald will check in at midnight. If anything, I know how to call for help, she said. A pause. I know you do, he said. She turned from the window. He was still near the door, coat on, the specific posture of a man who is not going to impose but is also not entirely comfortable leaving. Lorenzo. She used his first name without thinking about it. She had not used it before, not directly, and the shape of it felt slightly unfamiliar in her mouth. He registered it. She saw the fractional shift. I need to ask you something. Ask? The things Doyle found tonight, the access to my accounts, when it goes to the court, when it becomes a criminal matter. She crossed her arms loosely over her chest, not defensively, just holding herself together. How much of how we found it is going to hold up? Doyle doesn't exactly operate through official channels. Lorenzo looked at her for a moment. The evidence itself is clean, he said. The recovery email address is in your Google account settings. Anyone can see it. Doyle didn't hack anything. He sat next to you while you logged into your own account. He paused. What Doyle is and isn't is separate from what he did tonight. That's a careful answer. It's an accurate one. She held his gaze. Are you sure? She said. Claire Ashworth will be sure by morning, he said. That's her job. He opened the door. Lock this, he said. The deadbolt and the chain, not just the handle. I know how locks work. I know you do. He said it the same way he'd said the other thing. Not patronizing, just returned. He looked at her from the doorway. Get some sleep if you can. He left. She locked the deadbolt and the chain. She stood in the silent apartment and listened to the building around her. An elevator somewhere, a distant television, the ambient respiration of a structure full of people living their ordinary evenings. She thought about Marcus receiving the notification. She thought about what he did with his hands when he was angry. Not violent, never the thing you could point to as violence, but a stillness that replaced his normal ease, a quality of held tension like a spring being compressed. She thought, he's doing something right now. She didn't sleep until after 3. At 2:17 in the morning, Marcus Hale drove to Crown Heights. He parked 2 blocks from Nia's building, killed the engine, and sat. He had been sitting in a variety of parked cars outside a variety of locations, associated with Nia Brooks for the better part of 23 months, and he had developed a particular relationship with the specific quality of waiting. Not patience, exactly, more like controlled suspension, the deliberate slowing of his own internal clock. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. It was one of the things he quietly prided himself on, the ability to hold a position without fracturing. But tonight was different. Tonight he had received a notification that told him Nia had found the door he'd left in her accounts, and the person who had helped her find it almost certainly was not someone she knew from her social circle, which meant someone with resources and capability had gotten involved in her situation, which meant the quiet campaign of pressure he'd been running for 2 years had been observed and documented by someone who knew how to observe and document things. He sat with this for a long time. The street was empty. A cat crossed under a streetlight a block down. A window on the 3rd floor of her building was lit, some insomniac's glow, pale and constant. He had expected fear. His own fear. He was honest enough with himself to name it. What he felt instead was something colder and more focused, the same recalculating stillness she had recognized in him years ago. The situation had changed. That was all. Situations changed, and you adapted, and he was very good at adapting, and whatever had been assembled against him could be countered by the same patience and methodology that had gotten him this far. He needed to talk to her, not through an intermediary, not through attorneys or security personnel or powerful men who had apparently decided that Nia Brooks was worth protecting, directly. If he could get her in a room for 10 minutes, just 10, he could remind her of what she'd forgotten. He was good at reminders. He knew her voice when she was scared and her voice when she was softening and the precise distance between those two things. He waited. At 3:04, the light on the 3rd floor went out. At 3:37, he drove away. Nia's apartment had been dark the entire time. He did not know she wasn't in it. He would know by morning. Nia's phone rang at 6:52. Not Marcus's number, either of them. A number she didn't recognize, which she now approached with the specific learned dread of an animal that has been conditioned to associate certain sounds with pain. She stared at the screen, considered not answering, thought about what Doyle had said about documentation. Answered. Ms. Brooks? A man's voice. Flat, professional, with the slightly nasal quality of someone who spent a lot of time on the phone. My name is Detective Ray Okonkwo, Manhattan North. I'm trying to reach you in connection with a complaint filed yesterday afternoon. She sat up. Yes, that's me. I'd like to sit down with you this morning if possible. There are some details in the filing I want to go over and some additional information that's come to our attention overnight that I think you should be aware of. Her pulse picked up. What kind of information? I'd rather do this in person. Are you available to come in? Yes, she said. What time? The precinct on West 135th had the specific institutional atmosphere of a place designed for function and function only. Fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, the ambient noise of multiple conversations happening in adjacent spaces, phones ringing, a door somewhere slamming at irregular intervals. Detective Okonkwo was a tall man in his mid-40s with the kind of face that had probably been open and readable in his 20s and had accumulated a layer of professional reserve over the years, like paint over wood grain. The structure was still there underneath, but you had to look. He shook her hand and led her to a room with a table and 4 chairs and a window that looked out on a parking lot. He sat across from her and opened a folder. Ms. Brooks, the civil filing from yesterday, you're aware it's been flagged for potential escalation to criminal charges based on the digital access documentation. Yes. My attorney told me this morning. Good. That accelerated things on our end. He looked at a page in the folder. Overnight, we ran Marcus Hale through our system and cross-referenced with some neighboring jurisdictions. I want to ask you something directly. Okay. Did you know that 2 other women have filed complaints against Marcus Hale in the past 4 years? The question landed, and she heard it and understood it and felt the specific vertigo of a thing she had almost suspected but had successfully avoided confirming for a long time. I knew about the 2 civil complaints, she said carefully. I knew they were withdrawn. They were withdrawn, Okonkwo said. One was withdrawn 11 days after filing, the other 6 days. He looked at her steadily. Do you want to know why? She didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. The first woman left the state, Okonkwo said. We spoke to her this morning. She left because she was afraid of what would happen if she stayed. The second woman, he paused with the particular weight of a person choosing how to say the next thing. The second woman received a visit from Marcus Hale the day after she filed. There was no physical altercation documented. She dropped the complaint and 2 weeks later moved to her sister's place in Atlanta. Nia stared at the table. He does this, she said. It wasn't a question. He has a pattern, Okonkwo said, which is different from a record, legally speaking, because the complaints were withdrawn. But with your filing and the digital access documentation, we now have the basis for a criminal investigation that doesn't rely solely on any individual complainant. Meaning even if something happened that made you want to drop the complaint, he said it neutrally, without accusation, the investigation continues. The digital forensics alone constitute a separate criminal matter that doesn't require your continued participation to prosecute. The specific relief of that was something she hadn't expected. Not just her word against his, something that existed independently of her willingness to stand in front of it. The two other women, she said, will they cooperate now? The first one already said yes. Okonkwo closed the folder slightly. The second? We're working on it. She nodded. She thought about them, these two women she'd never met, who had done exactly what she had almost done, who had looked at the machinery of what he was and calculated that the cost of fighting it was too high and retreated to somewhere he couldn't follow. She understood them with a completeness that required no explanation. She did not judge them. She also thought, for the first time since this had started, that she was not the only person he'd done this to, and the loneliness of the past 2 years, the specific, corroding loneliness of being the only one who knew the full shape of what was happening, shifted slightly. Not gone, but different. She was not alone in the evidence. What do you need from me? She said. She was back at the office by 10:45. She looked normal. She had gotten enough sleep to function. She had eaten something at the precinct, a vending machine coffee and crackers that counted as food in the technical sense, and she had put on the professional exterior the way she always did, the assembled composure that no longer felt like a lie exactly, more like a tool she'd built and maintained and knew how to use. Lorenzo was in a meeting until 11:30. She used the time to go through the overnight emails, flag 3 things that needed his attention, send a response to the Harmon attorney, and draft the notes from Friday's conference call that she hadn't gotten to yet. At 11:22, her phone rang. Unknown number. New one. She looked at it. She answered. Naya. Marcus's voice, steady as ever, steady as a blade. I know you weren't home last night. She said nothing. I'm not angry, he said, and she heard beneath the reasonable surface of it something that was not reasonable at all, a tightening, a frequency change, the way a wire sounds different when more current is running through it. I just need you to understand that whatever is happening with the account, with the attorney, it doesn't change what's between us. You know that. There is nothing between us, she said. Nia, I need you to listen to me very carefully. She kept her voice level. She was aware of her own heartbeat, not racing, not slow, just present, a steady drum she could feel in her palms and her throat. There are 2 other women. I know about them now. The police know about them. This is not just my complaint anymore. The pause that followed was 3 seconds long. 3 full seconds, which for Marcus, who never paused, who was always ready with the next reasonable word, was an enormous amount of time. I don't know what you think I'm not thinking anything, she said. I'm telling you what is happening. The investigation is criminal now. The digital access is documented and forensically confirmed. Whatever you thought you were managing, you are not managing it anymore. Another pause. Shorter this time. You don't know what you're doing, he said, and the reasonableness had thinned to almost nothing now, the surface barely there. Yes, I do, she said. She hung up. She set the phone face up on the desk. She added the timestamp to her call log with hands that were, this time, completely steady. Marcus called back in 4 minutes. She didn't answer. He called again in 6. She didn't answer. At 11:58, while Lorenzo was wrapping up his meeting, the lobby desk called upstairs. "Miss Brooks, there's a man in the lobby asking to come up. He says he's a personal contact of yours and that it's urgent. He gave his name as Marcus Hale." The lobby desk associate's voice was careful. She had clearly been briefed because she didn't say, "Should I send him up?" She said he's asking to come up, which was a different thing, a waiting thing. "Don't let him up," Nia said. "Of course. Should I call Gerald? Now." She hung up the lobby line and stood up from her desk. The meeting room door opened and Lorenzo came out with two other men mid-conversation. He saw her face and the conversation stopped. The two men, reading the room the way people do when something shifts in the atmosphere, made brief departing sounds and moved toward the elevator. Lorenzo crossed the floor. "He's in the lobby," she said. Something happened in Lorenzo's face. Not explosion. He wasn't that. He was the opposite of explosion. He was the kind of cold that arrives after the fire goes out, more dangerous than the heat, and she watched it move through him with the specific efficiency of a man who has operated in high-stakes situations for long enough that alarm has been replaced by a kind of diamond-hard clarity. "Stay here," he said. "Lorenzo." He was already moving toward the elevator. She followed him anyway. The elevator down took 43 seconds. They were 43 seconds of complete silence. The two of them standing in the small space, Nia watching the floor numbers, and Lorenzo watching the doors, and neither of them saying anything because there was nothing useful to say. The doors opened. The lobby was its normal midday self. People crossing, the desk associate at her station, the security partition between the public entrance and the elevator bank. Through the glass of the partition, standing at the desk with his hands in his jacket pockets, was Marcus Hale. He saw Nia first. He smiled. Not the full smile, just the beginning of it, the version he deployed when he wanted to signal that he was calm and she was overreacting. She knew this smile the way you know a scar on your own body. Then he looked at the man standing beside her. Lorenzo walked to the partition door, not through it. He stopped on the inside with the desk associate and two building security personnel flanking him, and he looked at Marcus through the glass with the absolute, unhurried attention of a man who has all the time in the world and knows it. He pressed the intercom button on the wall. "You've been asked not to come here," Lorenzo said. His voice through the intercom was entirely calm. "You've been asked by this building. You've been asked by Ms. Brooks. You've been asked by her attorney and by NYPD. Marcus looked at him. The smile had settled into something harder. "I'd like to speak with Nia," he said. His voice through the lobby's speaker system was smooth, unchanged. "Just Nia. Whatever arrangement you think you have with her, this is between us." "There is no arrangement," Lorenzo said, "and there is no us. There's only the fact that you're standing in a building where you're not welcome, having driven to her apartment last night and called her twice this morning, which is documented in an active criminal investigation." A silence. Marcus's eyes moved to Nia. He looked at her with the specific attention he had always given her, focused, proprietary, the look of a man examining something he considered his. "You told him about last night," Marcus said, not to Lorenzo, to her. "I told the police about last night," she said. His jaw moved, almost imperceptible, but she had spent enough time studying that face to catch it. "Nia," he said, and his voice dropped into the register he saved for moments like this, quieter, more intimate, designed to create the illusion of a private conversation in a public space. "I love you. I have always—" "Stop." Her voice came out harder than she'd planned, and she didn't soften it. "Don't." "You don't mean—" "I do," she said. "I mean every word, and I've meant them every time I've said them, and you have spent 2 years deciding that what you want matters more than what I mean. That ends today." The lobby was very quiet. The desk associate was watching her monitor with the dedicated attention of a woman pretending not to listen. The two security personnel were utterly still. Lorenzo had not moved from the intercom. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then he looked at Lorenzo. "You think you've helped her," he said. "I know I have," Lorenzo said. "You've made things worse." The smooth surface of his voice was developing fractures now, small ones, the kind that appear when a controlled man runs out of the specific resource that control requires. You've taken something that was between two people and Gerald. Lorenzo didn't look away from Marcus. Gerald came through the side door with two additional personnel she didn't recognize and positioned himself near the lobby entrance. Marcus looked at them. He looked at Lorenzo. He looked at Nia. And for a single unguarded second, she saw something she had never seen on his face before. Not the reasonableness, not the methodology, not the patient, organized certainty of a man who believed he could outlast any opposition. She saw that he was losing. He knew he was losing. And she watched him make the decision. She saw it in the set of his mouth, the very slight squaring of his shoulders, to do what he had done to the two women before her, the thing that had made each of them calculate that the cost was too high. "This building has cameras," he said. "Everything you're doing is documented. Everything he's doing," the word landed with intention, pointed at Lorenzo, "is going to come out. You think he's protecting you? Ask him what Doyle does for a living. Ask him what favors people owe him and why. Ask him what kind of man gets to operate in this city without anyone touching him." The lobby held its silence. Marcus looked at Nia. "You traded one cage for another," he said. "At least with me you knew what the walls looked like." She felt the words go in. She would not pretend they didn't. He had always known where to aim. She looked at him. "Get out," she said. He held her gaze for 5 more seconds. Then he turned and walked out through the revolving door and into the cold November air, and the door spun behind him and went still, and he was gone from the lobby. The room exhaled. Nia stood at the partition. Her heart was hammering. She could feel it in her teeth. Her hands were at her sides, and she was not going to look at them. Lorenzo stepped away from the intercom. He came to stand beside her, and they both looked through the lobby glass at the empty entrance for a moment. "He's going to try to use you against me," she said. "What he said about Doyle, about your—" "I know." "Is he right? About any of it?" Lorenzo was quiet for a moment. "Doyle is not a man you can verify through official channels," he said. "The work he does exists in a space that isn't entirely clean. I know that. I've always known that." He turned to look at her. "It doesn't change what he found. It doesn't change what's in those account settings. And it doesn't change what happens next." "What happens next?" she said. Lorenzo looked toward the lobby door. "He's going to make one more move," he said. "People like him always do. When they lose the tools they've been using, they escalate to the last thing they have left." She looked at the door, too. She thought about the two women who had retreated. She thought about 11 months ago, sitting alone at her desk documenting phone calls into a notes app she'd never shown anyone, maintaining the log the way you maintain something you're not sure will ever matter but can't stop yourself from building. She thought about the resignation letter in Lorenzo's desk drawer. She thought about her hands on cold water in the bathroom sink. She thought, "I have spent 2 years being managed by his methodology." She thought, "What does it look like when I stop being manageable?" "Okay," she said. Lorenzo looked at her. "Whatever he has left," she said, "let him use it." And outside, through the lobby glass, the street moved with its ordinary November indifference, cabs and pedestrians and the gray afternoon light. And somewhere in it, Marcus Hale was walking, recalculating, compressing himself back into the shape of a man with a plan. And the spring was winding tighter, and everyone in that lobby knew that when it released, it would be fast and it would be final, and the next few hours would determine which side of this story each of them ended up on. He moved that same night. Nia had expected it. Lorenzo had expected it. Even Gerald, who expressed expectation through the economical language of preparation rather than words, had positioned 2 additional personnel at the company apartment on 58th by 6 p.m. without being asked. The waiting had its own specific texture, not the passive waiting of the past 2 years, the waiting that belonged to a woman with no options, but something active and braced, the waiting of people who have cleared the field and are watching the door. Marcus did not come to 58th Street. He went to Crown Heights. He went to Nia's building at 8:43 p.m., and he told the super, a heavy-set man in his 60s named Carl, who had lived in that building for 22 years, that he was Nia's brother and that their mother had been taken to the hospital and he needed to get into her apartment to find her insurance documents because she wasn't answering her phone and they were running out of time. Carl was a decent man who had never been given reason to distrust this particular story. He let Marcus in. Marcus spent 11 minutes in Nia's apartment. The building cameras recorded him entering and exiting. He carried nothing visible when he left. He walked back to his car at a normal pace and drove away. Nia found out about it at 9:18 when Gerald called. She was sitting in the company apartment eating toast she didn't taste, watching the city through the window the way she'd developed the habit of doing. Not anxiously, just watching, the way you watch weather. Gerald's voice was flat and precise in the way it got when the information it was carrying was significant. "He was in your apartment for 11 minutes, Gerald said. "We have it on camera." Carl the super confirmed the access. She set the toast down. "What was he looking for?" she said. "We don't know yet. Could be a device, could be documents, could be nothing. He may have just wanted to be in the space." A pause. "Or he may have left something." The word left reconfigured the room slightly. "A device," she said. "It's possible. We need to have the apartment swept before you go back in." She looked at the white walls of the company apartment. "Okay." "Nia," Gerald's voice shifted the smallest amount. Not softer, just more direct. "Don't go back there tonight regardless. We'll have someone there by 7 a.m. She agreed and hung up and sat very still for a while. 11 minutes in her apartment, touching her things, moving through her rooms, occupying the space she came home to, and closed the door on and tried to believe was hers. She thought about what it felt like to have that contaminated, and she felt the anger come up again. Not the cold, focused anger from the lobby, something raw and less manageable, something that had heat in it. And she let herself feel it for exactly as long as it was useful, and then she put it somewhere it would keep until she needed it again. She called Claire Ashworth. It was 9:27 p.m. Claire answered on the third ring, which told Nia something. "He accessed my apartment tonight," Nia said. "Told the super he was my brother. We have it on camera." A beat. "That's criminal trespass," Claire said, and even through the phone, Nia could hear the quality of attention in her voice sharpen. Combined with the digital access, the pattern of contact, and the 2 prior complainants, another beat. "I'm going to call Okonkwo tonight. It's 9:30. He gave me his cell for exactly this kind of thing." A pause. "Nia, this is it. This is the moment the case becomes undeniable. Are you holding up?" She looked at the window. "I'm fine," she said. Claire made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Of course you are. I'll call you in the morning." The apartment sweep found a small audio recording device in the kitchen, taped to the underside of a cabinet shelf beside the refrigerator. The technician who found it was one of Doyle's people, not NYPD, but the documentation of its presence was immediately transferred to Gerald, who immediately transferred it to Claire, who called Okonkwo at 7:51 a.m. and had a 20-minute conversation that Nia was not party to, but whose outcome she understood from the quality of Claire's voice when she called back. "They're moving on an arrest warrant today," Claire said. Nia was standing in her office, coat still on, her bag on the floor by her chair. She had come in early because staying in the company apartment with nothing to do was untenable, and work was the one context in which she had always, reliably, known what she was doing. "How long?" she said. "Hours, not days. The device in your apartment is unauthorized surveillance equipment. Combined with everything else, Okonkwo has enough for a judge, and he knows it." Claire paused. "I want you to prepare for the possibility that Marcus pushes back. He may try to contact you before the warrant is executed. If he does, I document it and don't respond." "Good." Claire's voice carried the measured approval of someone who had watched too many people undo their own cases in moments of weakness. "Let the process do its work now. Your job is to stay out of his reach for the next several hours." She hung up. Lorenzo appeared in the doorway of his office. He had been there when she arrived, earlier than usual, which she had registered without comment. He looked at her. "Today?" he said. "Hours," she said. He nodded once. He went back to his desk. She took her coat off. She sat down. She opened her email. She answered 11 messages with the careful professionalism she brought to everything, and underneath the professionalism, her heart was doing something uneven, and she was aware of it the way you're aware of weather in your joints. Not incapacitating, just present, a reminder of something significant happening in the atmosphere. Marcus Hale was arrested at 2:14 in the afternoon outside a coffee shop on Amsterdam Avenue. Nia was not there. She found out from Okonkwo, who called at 2:22 and delivered the information in the specific flat but not unkind register of a detective who has done this long enough to understand that the moment of arrest is not the end of anything, just the closing of one door, and the person on the other end of the call is going to need a minute. He gave her the minute. She sat at her desk with the phone against her ear and looked at the middle distance and breathed. "He'll be arraigned tomorrow morning," Okonkwo said. "The charges as they stand are stalking in the second degree, unlawful surveillance, criminal trespass, and unauthorized access to computer systems. There may be additional charges pending review." He paused. "With the two prior complainants cooperating, the DA's office considers this a strong case." "Okay," she said. "Are you all right?" She thought about the question for a moment, actually thought about it, which she rarely allowed herself to do when people asked it. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's a reasonable answer," he said. "Someone from the DA's Victim Advocacy Office will contact you this week. They'll walk you through what the process looks like from here." She thanked him. She hung up. She sat for a moment. Then she got up, crossed the floor, knocked twice on Lorenzo's door frame. He looked up. "They arrested him," she said. Lorenzo set his pen down. He looked at her face, the full reading look, the one that went past the surface. And she let him, which she realized was something she had stopped flinching from at some point without noticing the exact moment it changed. "Okay," he said. "I don't know how I feel," she said. "I thought I would feel something specific, but I don't. I just feel—" She stopped. "Like something very loud finally stopped, and I can't figure out what the silence sounds like yet." Lorenzo stood up from his desk. He walked around it and came to stand a few feet from her, which was closer than they usually stood, and he looked at her with the expression she had seen develop on his face over the past weeks. Not the professional neutrality, not the controlled assessment. Something more unguarded. "That's what relief feels like," he said, "when you've been braced for a long time. The absence of pressure doesn't feel like peace right away. It just feels like absence." She looked at him. "Is that from experience?" she said. He held her gaze for a moment. "More than I'd like," he said. They stood in his office doorway for a few seconds in the quiet of a floor going about its afternoon, keyboards and phone calls and the distant sound of the elevator, and Naya felt something shift inside her chest. Not dramatic, not a rupture, more like the slow settling of a structure that had been under lateral load for too long finally returning to plumb. Incremental, real. "I'm going to finish the Harmon notes," she said. "Good," he said. She went back to her desk. The arraignment was the following morning. Nia went. Claire sat beside her in the gallery. Not required, Claire had made that clear. She was not required to be present for the arraignment, and many people chose not to be. But Nia had thought about it carefully and decided that she wanted to be in the room. Not for him, for herself. She wanted to be in the room when his name was read aloud by a system larger than either of them, and the weight of what he had done was acknowledged by something with institutional authority, because she had spent 2 years being the only person who knew the full weight of it, and she needed to watch it be publicly named. Marcus looked at her once, from across the courtroom. Just once. His face did the thing she had spent so long learning to read. The controlled surface, the slight tightening beneath it. And then he looked away, toward his attorney, toward the judge, toward anywhere that wasn't her face. She kept her eyes on him the whole time. Not aggressive, not performing, just present. Just, "I am here, and I see you, and you no longer determine what that costs me." Bail was set. The conditions included no contact and a mandatory stay-away order covering her home address, her workplace, and a list of other locations her attorney had submitted. She walked out of the courthouse into the cold December air. Claire fell into step beside her. "How do you feel?" Claire asked. "Like I want coffee," Naya said. Claire smiled at that. A real one, not the professional version. "I know a place." The weeks that followed were not a montage. That was the thing she hadn't anticipated. She'd spent so long in the acute phase of the crisis that she'd half-consciously assumed the resolution would have a corresponding sharpness, a clear line between the before and after. There wasn't one. There was just Tuesday and then Wednesday and then the week after, and Marcus's case moved through its procedural stages at the pace that legal systems move, and Okonkwo called periodically with updates in his flat, precise voice, and Claire sent emails that Naya responded to, and life continued at the unremarkable pace of life. She found this initially disorienting. She mentioned it to Lorenzo on a Thursday in December, offhandedly, during one of their working lunches that had become as ordinary as the rest of their daily rhythm. "I keep waiting to feel finished," she said. "Like there should be a moment where it's done." "It doesn't work like that," he said, without looking up from the document he was reading. "I know." "It works like scar tissue," he said. "Slower than you want, functional before it feels like it." She looked at the takeout container in front of her. "That's a very specific metaphor." He looked up then. "I had a business partner 15 years ago," he said. "He decided he could betray me and survive it. He said it plainly, without drama. He was wrong, but the aftermath of that, the period after, it took longer to feel safe than it took to resolve the actual problem. The mind takes its own timeline." She understood he had told her more in those 4 sentences than he typically shared in weeks. She didn't excavate it. She just acknowledged it. "Did it eventually?" she said. "Feel safe." "Eventually," he said. He went back to the document. She went back to her food. The first morning she noticed was a Tuesday, 11 weeks after the arrest. She had walked from the company apartment. She had stayed there for the first 3 weeks, and then she had gone back to Crown Heights, and the Super Carl had apologized with a sincerity that was painful to witness, and she had accepted the apology without making it complicated. She had walked from Crown Heights to the subway, and then from the Midtown station to the office, which was a 6-block walk she made every morning. She was standing at the elevator pressing the button for 34 when she realized she had not checked over her shoulder once, not on the walk to the subway, not on the platform, not on the 6-block stretch from the station to the building. She had walked through the city thinking about the Harmon Amendment revisions and a phone call she needed to return and whether she wanted the Thai place or the salad place for lunch. And the city had been full of people and motion and ordinary noise, and she had moved through it without calculation, without the shoulder check, without the automatic census of nearby faces and vehicles and potential exits. The elevator door opened. She stepped in. She stood in the small space as it rose, and she thought, that's the first time. She didn't know whether to feel triumphant or devastated or something in the middle. What she actually felt was quieter than any of those, a kind of careful, provisional wonder, the way you feel when you've been holding your breath so long you've stopped noticing, and then someone points out that you're breathing normally. She got off at 34. She set Lorenzo's coffee on the corner of the credenza where she always left it. She sat at her desk. At 8:09, Lorenzo came in. He took the coffee. His eyes moved over her face the way they did every morning, that brief reading pass. He stopped. "What?" he said. She looked up. "I walked to work without checking if anyone was following me," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Something happened in his face. Not the controlled neutrality, not the professional assessment. Something that had the quality of genuine feeling that he usually kept at a remove from the surface, and she saw it clearly for the first time, and it sat with her somewhere deeper than she was ready to look at directly. "Good," he said. "Just that." He went into his office. She opened her email. The holiday gala was at the end of the month, in a rented space on the 48th floor of a building 3 blocks away, with the kind of view that made Manhattan look like something designed rather than accumulated. The company did it every December. Lorenzo attended because it was expected and he understood the value of expectation. And this year he had, without any particular announcement, arranged for Nia to have a role in coordinating it, which had the effect of making her presence there feel earned and functional rather than ornamental. She was good at it. She had always been good at managing a room. By 9 p.m., the event had reached the comfortable middle stage of its own momentum. People talking, drinks being refreshed, the city beyond the windows doing its luminous winter thing. Nia had handled 3 small fires and 2 medium-sized logistical complications without anyone noticing, which was exactly what good coordination looked like. She was standing near the windows with a glass of sparkling water. She had not been drinking much lately, a choice she had made quietly and without ceremony, when Lorenzo came to stand beside her. He had the ease he sometimes had in social situations. Not warmth exactly, but a settled quality, a man at home in the specific gravity of his own authority. He stood beside her and looked at the city and didn't say anything for a moment, which was comfortable because they had by now a well-established fluency in shared silence. "Good event," he said. "The caterer was 20 minutes late," she said. "Nobody noticed." "I noticed." "Nobody important noticed," he said. She almost smiled. They stood in the window light for a while. The party moved behind them, voices and music and the clink of glasses. The city below was doing what it always did, indifferent and magnificent, full of a million things happening simultaneously, none of them aware of any of the others. "I found out this morning," she said. "Marcus is taking a plea." Lorenzo looked at her. "Okonkwo called," she said. "They've been in negotiations for 2 weeks. With the 2 prior complainants and the digital evidence and the device in my apartment, his attorney told him to take what they were offering." She looked at the city. 18 months, 2 years supervised release, mandatory counseling, permanent stay-away order. "Is that enough?" Lorenzo said. She considered the question genuinely. "It's more than I had 6 months ago," she said. "It's more than the other 2 women got." She held the glass of sparkling water in both hands. "I think I made peace a while ago with the fact that enough is different from fair. Enough means I can walk to work without checking over my shoulder. Enough means he doesn't get to live in my nervous system anymore." She paused. "Fair would mean 2 years recovers 2 years. It doesn't." Lorenzo was looking at her with the open expression she had seen more of lately, the one that didn't have the professional surface fully engaged, the one that showed more of whatever was actually happening behind it. "You're different," he said. "Then when?" "Then October." She thought about October, standing at that window in the empty office, trying not to make a sound. The resignation letter he'd put in the drawer. The first time she'd come to his office and said, "I need to tell you something," and the world had quietly started to shift. "October was a long time ago," she said. 11 weeks, he said. 11 weeks is a long time when you count every day in it. He was quiet for a moment. "Nia," he said. She looked at him. He had the expression of a man who has thought carefully about what he's about to say and is committing to it regardless. "I want to say something, and I want you to hear it for what it is. Not what it could be used for, not what it might complicate, just what it is." She waited. "Watching you manage this, the past months, it's the most—" He stopped. Started again. "I have met a very specific kind of person in my life. People who hold themselves together under pressure through sheer will, not because things don't cost them, but because they've decided that cost isn't a reason to stop. My mother was that person. I've met maybe 4 others." He looked at her steadily. "You're one of them." She held his gaze. She thought about all the ways she could deflect this. The professional deflection, the modest dismissal, the "I'm not anything special" that she had defaulted to for so long it had started to feel like honesty. She said, "It nearly broke me." "I know," he said. "There were days this fall when I sat at my desk and I could not feel anything that wasn't fear." She said it without looking away. "I was not holding it together. I was just not letting it show." "That's the same thing," he said. "It's not, though." "Nia," his voice was quiet. "You think I hold things together because I don't feel the cost? I've been operating in environments that wanted me to fail since I was 23 years old. I know exactly what it is to go through the motions of control while something else is happening underneath." He paused. "That's not weakness. That's how people who survive difficult things actually look." She looked at him. She thought about Marcus's words in the lobby that day. "You traded one cage for another." And she examined them, which she had been doing periodically since he'd said them, holding them up to the light to see what was in them and what was just manipulation. And she had concluded that the manipulation and the intended cruelty were real, and underneath them there was also a question worth sitting with. What had she walked into? And did she trust it? And did she trust herself to know the difference between safety and dependency? She had been thinking about the answer for 11 weeks. "I want to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to be honest." "Always," he said. The things he said in the lobby, about Doyle, about the nature of how you operate. She held her glass steadily. "I'm not asking you to defend yourself. I'm asking you to tell me what's true. Lorenzo looked at the city for a moment. What's true, he said, is that I operate in spaces that have edges that aren't clean. I always have. The legitimate side of what I do is real and substantial. I have not built what I've built purely on things that happen in shadows. But the shadows are there. I don't have a version of my life where they're not. He looked back at her. What's also true is that I have never used any of that against you. Everything done on your behalf these past months, the security, the documentation, Doyle's work, was done in a way that will hold up, that was done to protect you, and that cost you nothing you didn't choose to give. She absorbed this. I know, she said. Do you? I've known what you are for 14 months, she said. I chose to stay. I chose to let you help. I made those decisions with my eyes open. She looked at the city. Marcus was trying to make me doubt my own judgment. He's been doing that for 2 years. My judgment was the first thing he went after. She paused. I'm not going to let him succeed at that from a plea agreement. Lorenzo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What do you want, Nia? Not from the case, not from your job. What do you actually want? The question arrived and she let it settle rather than reflexing toward an answer. She thought about October, about the resignation letter, about the notes app with 8 months of timestamps, about cold water over her wrists and forced smiles and the calculus of what time to leave the building. She thought about a woman who had spent so long in survival mode that she'd forgotten survival was supposed to be in service of something. I want to stay in this city, she said, in that apartment in Crown Heights. I want to stop doing the shoulder check, she paused. I want to feel like the space I take up in the world is mine, not given to me, not contingent on someone else's patience or generosity, just mine. She looked at him. I think I'm starting to get there, she said. He looked at her in the way he had, the full reading look, and she held it, and she did not look away. And this was different from the early days when she'd felt examined by it. This felt like two people who had been through something together looking at each other from the other side of it and taking a moment to register what they were both still standing. You were always going to get there, he said. You don't know that. I know what I saw, he said, the first night. When you were at the window and you thought no one was watching, you were not a woman who was done. You were a woman who was tired. He said it without sentimentality. Those are different. She thought about that. She thought about it and found it was the most true thing anyone had said about her in a long time, possibly because it was said by someone who had watched her when she thought no one was watching, which meant it wasn't performance, it was actual observation, and she trusted actual observation from a man who trusted nothing less. Go be at your party, she said. It's your party, he said. You organized it. It's your company. He almost smiled again. Then we'll split the credit. He turned back toward the room, and she turned with him, and they moved back into the warmth and noise of the gala together, two people who had arrived at a particular understanding that didn't need to be named yet, maybe didn't need to be named at all, that existed in the space between what had been said and what had been demonstrated over 11 weeks of ordinary days with extraordinary weight in them. In February, Marcus Hale stood in front of a judge and entered his plea. Nia was not in the room for that one. She had thought about it and decided she didn't need to be. She had been in the room for the arraignment, which was the moment that mattered, the moment of naming. The plea was administrative. She let it be administrative. Okonkwo called afterward. It's done, he said. Okay, she said. How are you? She was standing at the window in her apartment in Crown Heights. The February light was the color of old paper, flat and honest. The street below had a light dusting of snow from the night before, already going gray at the edges from foot traffic. The city's indifference to beauty as reliable as anything she'd ever known. I'm okay, she said. And she meant it. She meant it in the way she hadn't meant it in a long time. Not as deflection, not as the professional surface, but as an actual accounting of her actual state. She was okay. She was tired in the normal way people are tired in February. She was thinking about whether she wanted to repaint her kitchen and about a book she'd been meaning to finish and about whether she'd finally call Keisha back this week, which she had been putting off not from anger, but from the slightly complicated tenderness of a relationship that had survived a difficult moment and needed some gentle attention. She was thinking about her future in the specific, ordinary way that people think about their futures when they believe they have one. She thanked Okonkwo. She hung up. She stood at the window for a while. She was not looking at the cars on the street. She was not cataloging faces or running exit calculations or listening for footsteps in the hallway outside her door. She was just standing at a window in her apartment in the city where she grew up, in February light, looking at snow going gray at the edges, feeling the strange, hard-won provisional thing that she was beginning to understand was what people meant when they said fine and actually meant it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lorenzo. Harmon amended filing came through. Good work. She looked at the message. She typed back, I know. She could almost see the not-quite smile from 30 blocks uptown. She set her phone down and went to make coffee, and the apartment was quiet in the particular way of a place that belongs to you. And outside the window, the city went on doing the thing it always did, enormous and indifferent and full of people carrying their weights in whatever ways they'd learned to carry them. And Nia Brooks stood in her kitchen listening to the coffee maker and thought about nothing specific and everything at once, the way you do when you are finally, genuinely, unguardedly here. The shoulder check was gone. She hadn't noticed it leaving. That was the thing about survival. When it worked, when you came out the other side of something that had tried very hard to define you, it didn't announce itself. It just quietly stopped costing you what it used to cost. You woke up on an ordinary Tuesday and the weight that had lived in your chest for 2 years was lighter, and then lighter again, and then one day it was just a scar. Functional, faded, yours. She poured her coffee. She sat at her kitchen table. She opened her book. Outside, February snow began to fall again. New snow, clean and indifferent, and briefly, precisely beautiful. And the city received it the way the city receives everything, without ceremony, without pause, just the ongoing fact of itself, enormous and real and full of people learning, slowly and at great cost, what they were actually made of.